Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share a conversation I recently recorded with Hunter Hopcroft. Hunter is an Executive MBA format student in our class of 2020, and we recently caught up to talk a little bit more about his background, what led him to Darden, what he's enjoyed about the experience thus far, as well as his passion for stakeholder theory. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation, so without further ado, here's my interview with Hunter Hopcroft. Hunter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've already been on public radio being interviewed. I don't know if the ExecMBA podcast is a step down, from that, but we're so happy to have you here. Do you want to talk a little bit about the interview you did? I guess was it about a year ago on public radio?
Yeah, I believe it would have been. It was for a program called Full Disclosure with Robin Farzad, and in early 2018. Myself and a co-founder started a nonprofit called Virginia Foodshed Capital that does small farm microlending. Robin's podcast focuses on finding the business angle and areas that people don't typically think of as business topics. And so I was on with actually a local Charlottesville farmer, Erica Helen from Free Union Grass Farm, talking about agriculture and the business of agriculture and sort of the market dynamics there. It was really, well, for us, interesting podcast. People, agriculture is not something I think enters people's daily thought that often, especially if you live anywhere kind of metro or removed from a rural landscape, but it's certainly something that we, whether we believe it or not, interact with every day.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed that conversation. I mentioned it here at the outset. One, so everybody knows you're an old pro at these kind of things. And then two, should go check out that conversation as sort of supplement to what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit more about your MBA journey here, but we'll get into some of those things that you just mentioned. So just to level set here, Hunter, for our listeners, who are you? What's your background, and what are you currently doing?
Sure. So I started my career, I'm from Richmond. I was born and raised here, and I started my career in a very traditional finance role. I was doing research and due diligence on alternative investments like oil and gas partnerships or private REITs. And at the time, I would not have considered myself an environmentalist or really, to be honest, even particularly socially conscious. But I remember going around the country and hearing these pitches for things like fracking wells. And even as someone without that orientation, I thought, man, it seems like we shouldn't be doing this. And so it was hard to invest a lot of myself into that role professionally because you didn't believe in the outcome and it didn't seem very tangible. At the time, I was going to California a lot. I was actually interviewing for a job out in California with another financial firm, and I kind of got bit by the bug of entrepreneurship. I went into a small neighborhood market there that sold mostly local produce, and watching farmers come in, drop off food, watching neighbors come in and buy groceries, it had this kind of epiphany of, well, this is actual commerce. What happens on the stock market or what happens in these oil and gas trades? This is not the economy people interact with. This small market in Los Angeles is the economy people actually interact with. And it can actually make a difference. And so literally on the plane rides back and forth, I started sketching out a business plan for a market with the thought that, not that I would retire, into the grocery business, but that I would start a real business and that would be my MBA. I would have to make payroll. I'd have to pay suppliers, have to negotiate contracts. That would be my MBA. And that business plan came to fruition. And in undergrad, I had focused a lot of my studies on really hard skill things. I wanted to know corporate finance. I wanted to know accounting because I was on this track for a traditional finance role, but it wasn't but 2 or 3 days into running my own business that I realized that the people skills, the management, the leadership, the communication were not only much more important, but were much harder. And that if you don't have a natural talent for those things, they require training. And so I think that's when the thought of going back, getting an MBA to supplement some of these leadership and management skills, sort of that seed was planted back then.
And what about Darden resonated with you? I know being over in Richmond, it's just right down the road, so to speak. Yeah.
Certainly the case method was really important to me. I think especially after my initial experience that you learn things in a more didactic way, but they don't, without the application, they stay too theoretical. I came into a finance career where I'm looking at balance sheets and numbers are in the millions and sometimes billions of dollars, and it doesn't have that's a lot of money, but if you've only ever thought about it academically, you don't think about it the same way. And so case method and Darden and something where extracting actionable insights and applying those lessons and dealing with the nuance was very important to me.
So how has Darden, you mentioned this gap between sort of your undergraduate experience and what you started getting out there running a business, what you felt prepared to do. How has Darden helped you grow as a leader, as a business person?
Well, I think that speaks not just to Darden, but to specifically the executive format. And obviously the cases and the coursework and the professors are excellent, but they really are just sort of oxygen for the fire of your classroom discussion and the experience that's in the room. We have a decent percentage of current and former military, some high-level executives, people that have worked in all variety of roles. And the biggest value and the biggest development has come from, whether it be in class or after class, them relaying real-life instances and stories and challenging situations where they had to apply some of these leadership lessons. And I think it's hard to imagine a place where you could mine that much experience in the 24 months that were there for your own career. And so that's been the best part of it, is talking with people who've been in their career longer and have faced far more challenging situations, especially be they combat situations or things like that. Really changes your perspective on what leadership is and how to do it.
One of the subjects we've been talking about here on the podcast and on our blog is sort of the growth of entrepreneurial interest in the program that you see typically from the time students start to the time they get to the end of the program. You see more and more students expressing interest in at least exploring starting a business, or even going so far as to start a business. Do you have any perspective as someone who obviously has an entrepreneurial background? Do you have any perspective on why Darden might help students grow in that direction?
It's been really interesting in the classroom discussions. You see, I don't know if in my particular cohort it seemed like it was about 50-50, but there is 50% of the class that is very comfortable in a tracked corporate setting. That's really where they thrive. They like that structure. They like knowing what metrics they need to hit. They're used to and very comfortable navigating that system. And there's another half of the class that maybe they're in a corporate role now. Maybe they've had entrepreneurial inclinations, but that Darden will enliven that part of yourself. And if it's something that you're naturally inclined to, the classroom discussion is going to expose that. Likewise, it's going to expose if it's something you're not. I remember in Venkat's entrepreneurial thinking class how stark those differences were. You could immediately see sort of the risk takers versus risk averse in the room come to light. And so I think if you're a risk taker, you're going to Darden's going to expose that part of you. I would also say I would expect that to continue. I graduated undergrad in 2010, so coming into a Great Recession. I'm going to graduate business school into COVID. I think there's a generation that's coming into business school age that has seen the volatility and is interested more in being having at least some semblance of more control over their professional life, with sort of the volatility that seems to be inherent in the economy now. That for some people, operating within a corporate structure will continue to work, but there's a lot of people that are seeing that potentially that's not any less risky than starting a business. And so you might as well be your own boss.
I was listening to an interview with Andrew Yang, former presidential candidate, still very much on TV these days, talking about a lot of things. And he ran Venture for America, which you likely know a few things about. And he focuses on the risk of not getting out there and taking a chance to start a business and sort of putting yourself out in that way, which is kind of resonates with something that Jean Case said when she came and spoke to folks in the DC area as part of Leadership Unscripted. People tend to think about risk in terms of all the many things that can go wrong, but I was persuaded by the sort of his focus on well, there is a cost to not doing something, not pursuing something.
It's funny you say, one of the quotes I've been kind of living by, and I forget where I heard it, but I find it applies to so many things, is that if you think about a bell curve and if you optimize, yes, you do shave off all of the really bad outcomes, but you've also shaved off really all the really good ones as well. And when you optimize to that level, whether it be in your business or your personal or professional life, the way it's put is you lose the benefit of random variation. And so you're exactly right. You may have limited your downside, but you've also severely limited your upside.
So you had mentioned starting a small business, a grocery store, and some of the managerial challenges, leadership challenges you'd experienced. What did you learn through that experience? I think that's a business that we're all thinking about a lot these days, grocery stores and grocery store supply chains, and it's on people's minds a lot. What did you learn through the course of that business?
It's a famously difficult business. The margins are very thin. You're buying cups of yogurt for 50 cents and selling them for maybe 75 or 99 cents. So, there's just not much margin of error built in the business. And it's thought as not being a particularly intellectually, challenging industry, but it actually, the sort of psychology and the level of operational execution that has to go into doing it successfully is a tremendous undertaking. I think the thing I learned most, and I hit on this, is that all of these concepts are very different when you are making payroll or writing checks to suppliers, and they become so much less theoretical and much more a part of your daily life. And from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think people are always shocked to find how unplanned it is, and that your business plan, whatever one you have, it's not going to go that way on pretty much any given day. And I think that was something I really struggled with at first. I was really beating myself up about not executing how I had laid out the business plan, and then being in that network and talking to other small business owners or people that even ran larger businesses, that is the reality of it. It never goes according to the plan, and that your ability to get comfortable and manage around that is what will make you successful or not, and also will make you either completely crazy or not, is being able to walk in, within a year or two of that business being open. I really was walking in every day and had given up a to-do list. I'm going to walk in and I'm going to tackle the challenges as they come, and I'm going to go home. And I'm not going to worry about trying to get through some ambitious list. You're just going to take it as it comes. And I think that's something that a lot of people that go into entrepreneurship struggle with, as I did at first, because you feel like you're not executing at the level you thought you were, or you should be. But that's just the reality of the role.
How hard of a business is that to break into?
Like a lot of industries, it's been very consolidated, and so it's not hard to break into it, but it requires a high degree of scrappiness to be successful with it. And that's because if you're buying produce, you're buying it from the same distributors that Kroger and Whole Foods buy it from, but you're a much smaller account. And it's produce, and on some degree it's a commodity, but in others it's not. And so if you're buying 2 cases of broccoli, but they're the last 2, you're not going to get them Whole Foods is. And you're not going to get the unripe avocados. You're going to get the avocados that are just about to turn. And there's all sorts of things that being a smaller player, you're at a disadvantage of. I can't really fault the distributors for managing their relationships that way, but as a smaller player, it's something you have to figure out how to manage around. We had always come in with the plan of buying as much locally as we could, and it turned out that it would have been necessitated anyway to have the quality of product we needed to have, because we were never going to get that going through a produce distributor. We were never going to get the quality meat we wanted trying to break into the traditional distribution market. We had to go direct to farmers to get what we wanted. And so while it was part of the mission, it also ended up being an operational necessity to even be competitive.
So how did that lead you to your next opportunity, or maybe that got you thinking about other things you might want to work on?
Yeah, so I mean, I, as much as I sort of badmouthed it at the beginning, I still had a really strong academic, at least, interest in finance. I really like that way of thinking, and I like finding ways to use those tools for social good. I mean, finance gets a bad rap, but it actually provides some really crucial functions to society. I mean, think about your mortgage or insurance. Those are financial products that allow us to manage risk or, achieve things in life that we want to. And so I still believe that there was a positive use for that. And that's what kind of led to starting Virginia Foodshed Capital was, well, I'm operating in this market. I'm talking to farmers and growers, and I'm seeing that they have absolutely no access to capital whatsoever. And some of them have, at a minimum, sustainable businesses, but that it's unlikely that they're going to be able to grow their business into something that would be multi-generational or beyond a cottage industry without having some access to capital. And so I started the nonprofit, and it's a really very simple model. You talk about agricultural microlending, it sounds very complex, but really we raise capital from philanthropic sources like community foundations and family foundations. And then we give small loans, under $20,000 loans to farms to buy equipment that would have a tangible impact on their business. I mean, I mentioned it in the NPR interview, but one of my favorite things is if you've ever been to a farmer's market, eggs are a very hot commodity. A farm will sell as many eggs as it brings to the market. Eggs are actually quite labor intensive. You have to sort of find them in the roost. They all need to be cleaned. They need to be put into cartons. And one of the early loan applications we got was for something called rollaway egg boxes. And so the chickens roost and the egg falls through and rolls down this scrubbing pad to a kind of gutter where all of the clean eggs collect. And so it allows the farm to shave off the time of finding the eggs and washing them. And the farm predicted that it would save about 12 to 14 hours of labor a week. That was a $4,000 investment for those egg boxes to save 12 hours a week of work. To us, it seems like such a no-brainer investment. But if you're a farm, $4,000 is an extremely risky amount of cash to send out the door. So the purpose of the nonprofit was to fill that gap, and it has. And now we're in the stage of we're applying to be a community development financial institution with the Department of Treasury, and if we're awarded that designation, we'll be able to access low-cost capital from the Department of Treasury to do that kind of lending on a larger scale and kind of break in out of that $20,000 maximum loan amount to maybe somewhere between 20 and 100. Our goal is not to be a bank. Our goal is not to be a mortgage company, but if we can get farms grown to a level where they can access the traditional financial system and actually go into a bank and be bankable, that'd be a tremendous success. I was giving a talk on that early on, actually, in my Darden career, I gave a talk about what we were doing and some of the background of farm economics. And there was a guy in the audience, and he said, I'm working on something you may be interested in. And he was in the conservation finance space of using private capital to purchase and conserve land and generate a return from investors through things like sustainable forestry, carbon offsets, environmental service payments. And he needed somebody with a financial background to help him model and present these deals. So I started kind of moonlighting doing that. And then in July of last year, transitioned to doing that full time. So I feel like I have finally closed the loop on trying to find a way to use this financial way of thinking for good. And it's coming at a good time as I'm ending business school. You know, when I started at Darden, I was open to any path. You know, if that had been traditional consulting, I was going to, you know, go down that road and see what that looked like, if it was investment banking or whatever. But it was actually in the course of the program, and specifically Connie Dunlop's course, which I know everyone loves, that really was like, you know, that's not you. You know, you're interested in these more socially minded uses of your time and talents. And it was actually through the program that I felt like I really needed to double down on that part of myself, and have been able to.
So many questions related to what you just shared. I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier. For those of us who are less familiar with agribusiness, particularly for smaller farmers, why are they less able to access capital or unable to access capital?
I mean, the vast majority of farms, even large farms, to be honest, are on leased land. You know, and if you think about banking and traditional lending, there's kind of the three-legged stool. You have contracts, so like you're a construction company and you have all this work in the pipeline that you can bill for. You have collateral, so you have either land, buildings, or equipment that the bank could possibly collect. Or you have a cosigner. You have someone who's willing to put their name down that if you welch on this loan, they're gonna cover it. And farms often have none of those three. It's a business that it's not very bankable from a debt perspective if you start looking at risk versus reward, and it's also not very attractive from an equity standpoint, because they're not that profitable until they get to a large scale. But at the same time, they seem absolutely crucial to our society functioning. It always struck me that farming seemed to exist on some other plane in people's mind. There's business, there's government, there's nonprofit work, and then farming was sort of out on its own. But it is a business. It's a small business that employs many people. It represents about $1 trillion worth of GDP. But the reality is now that less than 2% of the population works in agriculture, and that farmers, the average age of the farmer is around 60, which, you know, mathematically means that most farmers are over the age of 60. So you either believe that number is going to drop to zero, or that agriculture and farming is this tremendous entrepreneurial opportunity, and that perhaps by what's going on now with COVID is finally going to get the disruption it's badly needed.
So you had mentioned finding out or reaffirming, I should say, through the professional advancement course, this sort of desire to have a social impact and be engaged with these kind of social issues. What attracts you to doing something with that? Is with that component to it, with that aspect to it? Is that something that's always been the case with you, or has that kind of grown over time?
I think it's certainly grown over time, and it really started with that first small business and getting to know farmers and participating in what I might call the real economy. That you realize that it's your time. That I love to work. I would work 7 days a week. I really like I don't do well with downtime. And so if you're going to spend that much time, I think you want something that at the end of a week, a month, or even a day, you can be really happy that you put out into the world. It's your productive output. I think that was one of the things I struggled with so much in that first job out of college, when I'm evaluating, you know, like I said, fracking operations or oil and gas wells. I said, well, the work is challenging, the work is mentally engaging, the work might be personally fulfilling from a financial standpoint or an intellectual standpoint, but if you just have this pit in your stomach that this is not something we should be doing, and that you are helping capital flow to that, it's hard to stay as motivated as you can when you're tackling a much larger issue that affects everyone, like agriculture or climate or inequality. Those things are going to sustain a 30, 40, 50-year career much better than some other uses of your time.
In preparing for this conversation, one of the things that you had signaled an interest in and a desire to talk about was stakeholder theory. And some of our listeners may have encountered that kind of language, may have seen stakeholders referenced in recent publications, Wall Street Journal, et cetera, as companies are starting to shift to using more of this language instead of just shareholder value, thinking about stakeholders. But for those who are less familiar with this concept and these ideas, want to explain exactly what that is?
Sure, and as someone who's highly biased, I'm not sure I would necessarily take my my explanation as maybe the best representation of it. But on the one hand, there's the Milton Friedman school of thought that profits, and that a company that focuses on profits and the advancements of their shareholders, at least from financial aspect. And the best way I know how to synthesize it is that Friedman felt that profit was not only a moral imperative for the company, but that it would be this almost optimizing force. That if a company focused intently and almost solely on profits, that their decision making would fall into a framework that would prevent waste and actually lead to the betterment of society by focusing on profit. Ed Freeman at Darden has been one of the sort of leading thinkers behind stakeholder theory, which is that a company exists in society and needs to take into account all of the relationships that it interacts with: shareholders, employees, suppliers, the government, the community where it operates, and that it needs to make decisions in the framework of all of those actors. It is a theory that's gotten more popular in recent years, but I think there's always that draw back to Friedman as something that seems almost a fabric of American business, is that profits are king. But like I mentioned earlier, we're living to where we've had I have been alive for now 3 once-in-a-lifetime recessions, that perhaps profits aren't the optimizing force that Friedman thought they were, at least the way we're doing it now. I would also update some of those concepts a little bit into sort of how we talk about them now. People are not as profits are not something that businesses talk about as loudly anymore for a variety of reasons. I think there is some social stigma attached to that. We've replaced that with the language of data and KPIs and optimization and all of those words, that sort of business lingo that kind of dehumanizes business. And so I would say the sort of update of the shareholder versus stakeholder is: are you going to be a data and optimizing firm, or are you going to be a relationship firm? This experience now that we're going through, I think, demonstrates, perhaps better than any time in history, the value of relationships in business, and that all of business is a framework of relationships. Anybody can send almost anybody an email, but this has exposed who do you really have? Who can you call? Who can you send a text to? What are your relationships in business? And so I think coming out of this, that stakeholder theory is going to be even stronger than it was already drifting.
How does that guide you as you think about your work or in the problems that you're trying to solve? How do those principles help you?
it's come up in a few courses. I think most recently the strategy course, where for things to be successful, almost more than being profitable, they need alignment of those stakeholders. If your business is very profitable, but it doesn't work for employees can't build healthy, meaningful lives working there, it's not going to work. If your business is profitable, but you're run out of every community that you try to do business in because it's so disruptive, it's not going to work. And that when you're evaluating a concept or a course of action, you need to look for alignment. And the sort of cliche is that things need to be win-win. And I think that's probably a little bit of a mischaracterization. I mean, the best example I always think of is when you stay at a hotel and they say, well, we're trying to save the environment. If you want to help, hang your towel up and we won't wash it. Well, is that because hotels are very into the extremely specific benefit of not washing towels? No, but there's this great thread of alignment through that. It does benefit the environment not to wash that many towels. It benefits the company because they don't have to spend the money washing the towels. It makes the consumer feel good because they were able to do this extremely low cost thing of just reusing a towel. And I think the more things in business that we can find where there's that kind of alignment, we'll continue to move the puck forward on this, that there are answers like that. Now, the cynical people, the cynic will say, well, they're only doing that to save money. Well, okay, I'm fine with that, but there's still that alignment there and the positive benefit is still there. And I think those are the things we need to look and use some of the training that we're coming out of this, out of Darden with an MBA to think about alignment in those ways.
So as we were sort of debriefing, getting ready for the call here, you mentioned attending the Climate Cap conference that happened at Darden, and I don't know how many of our listeners have heard about this conference. It was just an incredible opportunity for people to come and connect with sort of like-minded people around sort of the issue of climate. It happened just, it feels like a very long time ago, but it's really maybe just a month or so ago. Do you want to talk about that, Hunter?
Yeah, it was the end of February, which we were saying was probably the last time you could gather like that in a conference format. And it was very fortunate that it happened to be at Darden this year because they said 2021 is going to be in China, so I probably wouldn't have been able to attend, but it was an amazing 2-day conference that hit on sort of every sector that interacts closely with the climate. So obviously energy, the financial system, and then agriculture. And it brings together MBA students from all over the country that are interested specifically in climate, but then also within those subsectors, whether they be financial services or energy or agriculture. And there was an agricultural breakout session, and being into ag and business school can be somewhat of a lonely experience. It's not a business that comes up in many cases. And it was great to see a Darden classroom filled with MBA students from across the country that were interested in ag and interested in coming at it from this perspective of the fact that it does have a huge lever on not only the economy, but also the environment, and seeing opportunity coming out of an MBA program in agriculture was really exciting. That I'm not crazy. There is something here.
No, it's nice to have those experiences where you kind of find your tribe, so to speak.
Absolutely.
What are the issues that are on your mind? As you're obviously somebody that's very engaged, thinking about the world, thinking about how do we make this whole thing better? What are you thinking about these days?
Yeah, and I think that some of the topics that conference really hit on it is that for this economic regime we've been in, and it's hard to say how long we've been in it, but certainly as computing power increased and became more democratized, we viewed almost every industry as an engineering problem, and agriculture in particular. How can we maximize outputs and minimize inputs? And by those standards, we've been very successful at minimizing inputs and maximizing outputs. What this experience is showing us is that we didn't build in much resiliency to the system, that while it may be very profitable and it may operate very smoothly, it only does so in a very calm and average world, and that any shocks to the system are extremely detrimental. And so I'm thinking about ways to decentralize the system and that we can restore more regional economies and not everything be such a global economy, and start thinking of things how they really are in the world, which is as biological systems, not mechanical ones, not systems of inputs and outputs, but systems of interdependencies and relationships and things like that, and start looking through business through that lens. And that feeds right into that stakeholder theory. And I think coming out of this, people are going to see that that's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, but it's good business to do, because when things like this, these black swan or outlier events happen, if you have not built resiliency in the system, even though this may be something that has a 0.01% chance of happening, if when it happens, it causes everything to fall apart, it's something you need to plan for anyway.
So I think your point about people not being perhaps as aware about agribusiness, we're not thinking about it a lot or not being as drawn to it as other industries. My hunch is that we as a people have thought a lot more about it over the past month, given some of the stories about supply chains and what's happening with farmers. For people who are hearing what you're talking about here, Hunter, and kind of want to take a next step and maybe learn more about this industry, what are some good next steps for folks?
Oh, that's a great question. That's always a difficult question. Somebody in the class asked me that the other day. Well, how can I learn more about this way of thinking? And it's tough when you're so sort of in it to come at it from a beginner's mind. But one thing I would encourage everyone to do if they get the chance, especially as the sort of as we get back to a more normal society, is to spend even an afternoon volunteering on a farm, not more so you can see the reality of the work, and then see what goes into picking a tomato or getting a potato out of the ground. And then when you walk into the grocery store and you see a 10-foot high pile of them, and you think how many grocery stores there are in my city and how many grocery stores there are in the county, and how much work that it took for me that day to get the potato out of the ground or to pick a basket of tomatoes, you'll start to think of it differently, and that the size and the scale of the system is really overwhelming, and that it is something that you interact with every day, and you can't. The system has done a tremendous job of making sure that you don't really ever think about where it came from or how it got there. So I think actually getting your hands in the dirt, not that you have a plan on being a farmer or do it again, but we'll make that reality very, very stark.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I'm reminded, I lived in communities before that have CSAs, and also there's community gardens up here in the Washington D.C. area. A little bit harder to have a plot of land in D.C., but you make a great point that we are separated from the food supply chain in a way that kind of makes all the food that shows up in our grocery stores a little bit mysterious. Like where did it come from? How did it get here? Who was involved in that? We don't really know.
And you don't think about it till you walk in, until in this experience when it's not there.
No, it's a great point. So coming back to sort of just one final question here for you, Hunter. This has been a great conversation, and we could keep you here on the podcast much longer for sure. But I'm curious about your advice for prospective students who are listening to this podcast, just maybe thinking about pursuing an MBA or started to think that maybe Darden's where they want to be. What advice would you share with those folks?
I would say, absolutely. Like me, to get the most out of it, you absolutely have to be true to yourself. And I came in willing to, for lack of a better word, sell out. I was open to any path, and the program really did a great job of forcing that self-evaluation of, well, what do who are you really, and how do you want to spend your time? And I would encourage any prospective students, whether they're deciding where to go to business school, if to go to business school, or what their goals are for afterwards, that they really lean into who they really are and not try to be something that they think they should be coming out of business school. I think what we're going through now presents a tremendous opportunity for everyone, because the rules are going to be so different, and what you do with an MBA will be very different than it was 10 years ago, and that's a good thing. And so I think the opportunity for everyone to go and have these experiences to not only advance their business knowledge or their career, but to tap into what really motivates them is a great reason in and of itself to go.
Well, Hunter, thank you so much for your time this morning. Obviously, it's great to talk with you anytime. I hope y'all are staying safe and healthy down there in Richmond. Everything okay on your end?
Yes, it is. We're very fortunate. We live near a park, and I'm still able to get outside, and we're not so dense here, so it's been fine. Although I hope we're able to see each other in person soon.
We miss the current students, just like y'all miss each other. I get to see you online, but I think Jim Dieter just said this, and I agree with this. Man, it's going to be great to be back in person again. Looking forward to those days. So
it really will.
Well, thank you so much for taking time for the podcast. Always a pleasure, and stay safe and stay well, and have a great rest of the day.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
And that was my interview with Hunter Hopcroft, second-year student in our Executive MBA class of 2020. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.